Greetings, Minecrafters, and welcome to another very interesting discussion today. My name is Kimberly Quinn, and I am here with Sarah Camille Wilson at the gorgeous Champlain College campus. And I'm going to give you a second, and Sarah Camille is going to tell you what she'd like to talk to you about today. But first, I would actually like her to explain to you what it is she does over there in our library.
Thanks, Kim. So I do work at the beautiful library here at Champlain College, and I manage the customer service team of the library. So that means that I manage the team of pro staff and student employees who are opening and closing the library, staffing the front desk. I'm part of the reference team, which means that I meet with students to help them with their research. And generally just make sure that the doors are open, that the lights are on, and all of the resources that students need are available to them during all of the library's hours.
Okay, so I'm chuckling a little bit with Sarah Camille because, of course, I've known her for a while now, and I've actually witnessed her, doing her library goddess maneuvering over there. And I went over there because she had asked me to help out with anxiety and mindfulness sort of little mini workshop, right?
With my student worker team,
There
exactly.
were a
Yeah.
lot of them.
Yeah.
I remember the whole thing was filled up like
About
16, 18,
like
20.
25.
25.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
And so the reason I'm bringing that up is because that's where we're headed. So it's interesting how somebody's title or whatever they say, they're your sort of human doing example, right? The human being example is Sarah Camille brings a whole lot more to the library than just her fabulous executive functioning skills. So we talked earlier. I think Sarah Camille is headed in the place of one of my favorite topics, actually, which is the mind body connection. And she's going to sort of take us off and running with why physical activity isn't isn't separate, right? You're talking about the integration of our lifestyles. Why don't you run with that? Tell us what you mean.
Yeah, I think probably the single thing that has made the biggest difference in my own relationship to exercise, as well as my well-being and ability to function in the world, has been realizing that physical activity can and should be woven into everyday life rather than being this separate, finite thing, rather than being this notion of for 23 hours of the day, you're not an active person. And then for 1 hour of the day, you go to the gym, which actually means probably that's 3 hours out of your day because you have to get to the gym. You have to change into the special outfit. You have to do whatever you're doing, change out of the special outfit, maybe shower if you're going back to work. Whereas if physical activity is something that is just a constant part of your life that's woven into everything that you do, that can really have tremendous benefits in terms of making you more active, which means that you typically feel better mentally, physically, emotionally, and it becomes something that you don't have to think about as a to-do list item. It's already been done because it's how you live your life. It's already been done because it's how I live my life, and it's a mindset shift that I would love more people to think about and be work on adapting for themselves, which is why I wanted to talk to you about it, to spread the news about this way of thinking about it.
Oh God, Sarah Camille, I absolutely love this, and you're preaching to the choir here, right? Because you and I are like peas and carrots with this whole thing. We totally gel because we were talking about lifestyle versus becoming like a gym rat. No offense to gyms, right? But if it's something that's laborious and it takes you forever to get there and get your stuff, especially in the snow in northern Vermont, it's a big, huge project. Then you're there, you do your thing, you sweat, you come home, and you take a shower, or else you freeze and get the chills, right? So is that sustainable in your opinion for long term?
I don't think so. I don't think it's sustainable from my own experience at other points in my life, and not from, for the most part, what I see from other people. Of course, there are exceptions for everyone, but I think I like, this notion of how something that is just a habit, like there's this concept of an overload of choice, right? And like an overload of decisions. And if something is a habit that you don't have to think about, then that's not draining that capacity. So you have that ability to make those choices where you really need to make them, and not in these things where it can just be a part of your life and not something where you need to be choosing to go to the gym or choosing to do X or Y, but rather how you live your life is just, a habit and something that's totally integrated.
So yeah, so what I think, so what maybe what you're saying is willpower, not to put it down because we need willpower, right? But it
Totally.
only gets you so far. Like if you're not I use the word attracted, like if you're not attracted like a magnet because you want to be, because you're actually enjoying it, not because it's a military drill.
Yeah.
You're less apt to.
Yeah. And even if you truly want to be active in our super busy lives,
Mhm.
it is really hard to continue to make the conscious choice to carve out time when you have the option of having it be integrated into your life where it's a habit and you're not making those choices in the same way.
Oh, I love that, and I'm sure as you're aware, I'm trying to think of who to give the credit to. Sean Aker from the Happiness Advantage. That basically the average amount of time for a habit to shift and stick is 21 days.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, of course, that's average, right?
Yeah.
Because quitting smoking is not the same thing as eating a piece of fruit in the morning for a new habit. But so rough, like if we get going with something that's like you're saying, that you're trying your intention with intention, you're incorporating into your lifestyle, it eventually gets easier. Like
Totally.
okay,
Or that's certainly been my experience. And I'm sure I've tried to incorporate things that haven't stuck because they
right,
weren't right for me. And I think that's also how you sort of figure out what you're suited to and what's right for you. Like if you try and make it a habit and incorporate it seamlessly into your life and it doesn't work, maybe forcing it's not the best option. Maybe the best option is to say, I guess this isn't for me. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do
right.
these other things that feel more life-giving and more
Hmm.
positive, and are, my hope, for myself and my hope for others is for these things to be energy generating, not
Hmm.
energy depleting.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. I had to actually do some shuffling to myself because my mind, especially since where we are in the year calendar year right now, when it's New Year's Eve, what do like a lot of people do with the resolutions, right?
Yeah.
And then 3 weeks later on Craigslist, what's on sale at dramatically reduced prices?
Yeah. Your Nordic this or
Yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah.
whatever.
This or
Yeah.
that, and the
Yeah.
treadmills and the
Yeah.
ellipticals, and like so,
Yeah.
that's like the proof of the pudding right there.
Yeah.
It's not going to work unless it's like it's inviting.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, awesome. So I know Sarah Camille and I were chatting before we turned all of you on here, and I know that she's got several good examples slash tips for this sort of lifestyle integration with the physical activity. Want to share some of those with us?
Yeah, sure. So, I think also I just want to say that I recognize that, the things that work for me are not going to work for everyone, right? And, the things that I've chosen to prioritize, things that align with my values and make sense for the structure of my life, they would look very different for someone else. I'm always like with anything, I'm like, the goal here in sharing what I do isn't for people to copy me, but it's more to think like, but what would that look like for me?
Right, right, right.
So some ways in which activity is really woven into my life are many of my colleagues and students at Champlain know that I am an active commuter. I bike commute year round. So that's a small amount of activity. I only live about 2 miles from campus, but it's 10, 15 minutes each way in the morning and in the evening. And, that's the kind of thing too, where small pieces cumulatively add up. So, that means that just through commuting, I'm getting in several hours of biking a week without doing any additional biking. But if I were to try to set aside 3 hours to bike
Hmm. Hmm.
exclusively, that's much harder to do. Of course, I do that sometimes, but that just sort of sets a baseline of those things being incorporated. Something else that actually I feel like the pandemic gifted to me is walking meetings. So, I can't believe that this is really not something I took advantage of before, but for whatever
Right.
reason, I never thought about it. But then during the period of time, so in the 2020-2021 school year, my team and I, including student workers, were on campus working at the library. It was very quiet. We were all masked and we couldn't be unmasked in a space together. And I was trying to figure out how I could have meetings, especially with my student worker teams, about their well-being and how they were coping under those circumstances that would feel more natural and more organic. And I realized, well, we could take our masks off if we were outside, but just like standing around outside, especially in, most of the school year in Vermont, it's not
Cold
very pleasant. You're going to be
or
super
windy
cold
or
and
something
cold,
or
windy, all
wet.
of it. Yeah. And so that was where like the walking meetings were something I started doing. And I immediately realized that they were just fantastic because many, so I still do this. I do one-on-ones with my pro staff as walking meetings most of the time. When I'm checking in with the student workers on my team, those are usually walking meetings. And I found that particularly for folks who, for whom a one-on-one interaction can feel really challenging, if you're in
Mhm.
motion side by side, suddenly that interaction becomes so much more natural. We're able to share things with one another
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
listen to one another and be present for one another in an entirely different way that just feels so rich and positive. So as challenging as many of, the things that COVID brought us are, I feel really grateful that it opened my eyes to how
Mhm.
impactful walking meetings can be. And so that's something that I've kept up consistently as we've sort of returned to less of those COVID protection measures. And I think walking too, I think there's an interesting thing that has happened in American culture, particularly, where this idea that if you're not sweating and you're not elevating your heart rate, then the activity you're doing is just not worth it. And so people don't do anything because it's not good enough. But having a consistent walking, practice in your life, if you're doing that regularly, that has tremendous benefits for your physical, mental, and emotional health. And something that it also has really shown me, and I think, like Kim, you and I were talking about how we are both bodies that like to be in motion.
Got to.
But I've found that, if I'm trying to solve a problem or, figure something out, I could stand in front of my computer for the entire day and never get there. But if I take a 5 or 10 minute walk, I almost always by the end of that short walk, I found the answer, found the solution, or I've just shifted my thinking in a way that's productive, in a way that I never would have if I hadn't sort of just put my body in motion for those just few minutes.
Fresh air thing.
Totally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, and I just remember because my husband's a Harry Truman fan. He thinks there's like an underground club in Vermont. It's just kind of funny. But so I know more about Harry Truman than most people, probably just by default. And he used to tell me because he reads everything about him and knows his whole life. But Harry Truman used to say, I forget his cliche, not cliche, but his quote was walking every day, and he lived a very nice long life, and he got problem solving thing as
Hmm.
president of the United States, obviously, right?
Yeah.
And he went on and on about how healthy it is for one and the longevity and everything. It doesn't have to be running. It doesn't have to be you're a long jumper.
Hmm.
Just walking has you living longer than people who are sedentary. Period. Never mind the clear-headed thing and the problem solving.
Yeah.
So there you go. You're right in the same league with Harry Truman.
There you go.
Okay, I love this, Sarah Camille. It's just so much to digest, and it's just such a great and timely conversation as we come out of the pandemic, and people being sedentary who might not have been, and those who were maybe became more sedentary. But what struck me with what you just said about the pandemic gifted me, I love that. I haven't heard anyone refer to it in such a positive light, and how you found some of your students benefiting from not having to be in such a close proximity because they were taking masks off. That's why you did it originally,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So they could walk next to each other and talk, but could sort of like we were saying, and not meant to be demeaning. That's not the point. How 2-year-olds are known for their parallel play, like playing together separately, and it's not meant to be demeaning because it's a coping skill that I've seen seasoned adults borrow to not feel uncomfortable, right? They do stuff next to each other or whatever. So here's you and I were talking earlier about how the physical activity can help with bringing anxiety down, and also you talked about mindfulness basically, and how the physical activity brings you in the moment, which then leaves no room for anxiety. Did I hear you right?
Yeah, I think so. Something that actually a doctor that I saw a few years ago said that really stuck with me is that anxiety doesn't exist in the present moment. That, if you think about anxiety, it is entirely a function of either, the unknown of the future or sometimes regret about the past. I feel like it's sometimes that, but it's more so about the unknown, what we can't control, what might or might not happen.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can, be in that present moment, then there's no place for anxiety there. And a way that um, I find it helpful to sort of keep myself anchored in the present moment, especially when I'm feeling anxious, is to focus on physical sensation. And,
Totally.
just like the way, like how, does the air feel on my skin, pressing my feet into the ground and feeling that grounding, anchoring. And I think that that's a piece for where the walking meetings also work for that. Like, if a student is sitting across a desk from me to have a conversation, for one thing, that's like kind of a contrived situation to begin with. It's not ever. It's always going to feel a little like that structure is sort of designed, I think, to
Mhm,
promote a
mhm,
little bit
mhm.
of anxiety. And so there's a way where, when we're not facing each other and we're side by side. I love what you were saying about parallel play. As you're in motion together, that motion, I think, has a way of anchoring you in the present moment, decreasing that anxiety. And then by, having that conversation as you're moving side by side, it can allow you to have more, a little more space around the conversation and not feel so put on the spot. Especially like I have really noticed a lot of our students feel, when having those conversations, that it can be, even the most well-intentioned conversation, where my goal is just to sort of assess their well-being and see how they're doing, I think can cause them to feel anxious. And I think the walking just makes it feel more organic. It makes it feel more informal. It makes it feel, less a meeting and more two people just having
A
a
conversation.
conversation. Exactly.
Oh my gosh, I love this. And I just have to comment right now because I've seen Sarah Camille in action, and to have such a grip on your students is amazing. I'm just making like a blanket put it out there thing with other leaders, because to be in tune at this level and notice ways you can be an influence to help people, any people, not just young adult people, communicate more effectively because their anxiety is being reduced. That's huge, huge in making a difference, and also authentically with the person's mental health and just comfort level. And then also those students, or let's say employees, if it's a different context, the productivity level is going to be so much higher because they'll be happier and more relaxed, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Now this is great, Sarah Camille, because and now so this kind of segues us to when I was reading some of Sarah Camille's points last night actually, and I loved how the concept you phrased is, I call it broccoli mode when somebody's just vegging, and how, because I know with my Minecrafters we've talked about it, that is not rejuvenating, or you said restorative. That's also a good word. It's not. So there's a type of rest that you're saying is like the opposite of autopilot. And why don't you tell us about that type of rest?
Yeah, this is something that I think has been a growing realization for me. I think, particularly in the last few years, actually, probably a lot of it has been the increase in screen time, which is a
Oh my
real burnout
god.
factor for me.
Yeah.
But just sort of thinking about the concept of constructive rest as opposed to passive rest. I think there's often this idea, like somebody gets to the end of the day or the week and they're like, oh, I'm so tired. I just want to sit on the couch and let the Netflix shows just keep flying
Mm-hmm,
by.
mm-hmm,
Maybe it'll ask if I'm still watching at some point, but
mm-hmm.
it's like it's a very passive thing, as opposed to, even though you're tired and you feel like you just had a day, had a week, making the conscious choice to do something like take a short walk. And I'm really lucky, actually. I have a wonderful dog who
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
requires 3 walks a day or more. And so, if I get home from work and I'm tired, I actually have the gift of he's smiling and wagging his tail and ready for me to take him for a walk. And that, gives me that little moment of reset, in that way. But also, like going to a yoga class. And that is where I feel like you have to find that balance. Like we were talking earlier about, making excessive choices and how having to make too many choices is exhausting. Um, and so, what I'm always trying to fine tune and figure out for myself, and this is always changing, is where is that perfect balance? And there is no perfect
Right,
balance,
right,
but where
right.
is that place where I'm not exhausting myself with having to make choices, um, but I'm also not just surrendering to this passive broccoli mode. I
Right,
love
right, right.
that, thing where I just come home and I just sit on the couch and watch shows for 3 hours. With that 3 hours, like I love how you always are talking on the podcast about your life minutes and spending your life minutes
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
wisely. But also, beyond even that, just I've really found that if I can take a few minutes, or maybe an hour, often less than that, to do something that falls into that constructive rest. And it's not just things like walking or yoga. Like for me, cooking,
No,
huge constructive
me
rest.
too.
A great, it's where I can feel creativity. It's where I can do something that is, about hand and eye and taste and smell, all of which are great anchors to the present moment. It's like the opposite of
Oh,
screen time.
totally.
Those are things that are really, super impactful for me in terms of like restorative, constructive rest, which does take a little bit of a choice because there again, too, I guess I'm choosing to cook instead of getting takeout. But most of the time, that really is what is a more positive and useful way of spending 45 minutes after work for me. I could sit and wait for a pizza to come. Sometimes that's great. Or I could have the experience of cooking and, preparing a meal that, usually doesn't take that long, but that experience of cooking is so important in that world of constructive rest and that, no screen time after work time.
Oh my God, Sarah Camille, I'm totally with you. I realize that maybe the cooking thing isn't for everybody, but why I feel you on that because even if you have those weeks where you're out of stuff in your house, I'll
Yeah.
just throw some, and it's just the
Yeah.
being in the kitchen. Sometimes I'll put like acoustic, not word music as
Yes.
much. It's because I
Yes.
don't want my brain like George Winston in the Fall or something like
Yeah.
that. And the smells. I like that you brought that in because the aromatherapy while you're making a chicken parm or whatever.
Yeah.
With I mean, to me, it's enormously relaxing as well. And I just love the whole idea of that. But how it not that there isn't a day or night for takeout.
Totally.
Right? For
Takeout
maybe
Friday.
you don't feel that right.
Yep.
But in general, if we can incorporate, how did you say again, the rest?
Constructive rest. Yeah. And sort of like taking pleasure in these things that like you maybe need to do anyway. Although, I mean, you could also have a great life where you choose not to cook. I also, in terms of cooking and how I think about cooking, I feel really lucky. My father was a cook for his whole professional life. And I didn't realize until later that it's kind of unusual the way that I learned to cook from him. I really don't ever follow recipes.
I don't either.
And if I have to follow a recipe, that actually takes me out of the present moment. And I find it much less restorative than the organic process of cooking, based on what I have on hand, taste, smell, all of that sort of thing.
That's why I haven't used a recipe in years. I'm the same way as you. And what I just thought of right now, and my husband's gonna love being talked about on the podcast, but he loves to drive around on his little tractor mower and mow the grass. And he has a big job and he works like a million hours. And our oldest daughter, this is not that long ago, it was this past summer. He was around the backyard, and she comes out. She goes, "Look, Mom, Dad's zenning." Like, because that's and that cut grass, the whole thing.
Yeah.
But it's not a chore for him. He's by himself, without the wife and all the kids, living the dream out there, mowing the lawn. So I think it's different for everybody.
Totally.
But I think, and he does come out of that lawn thing, seemingly anyway, kind of recharged.
Oh, totally. Exactly. That makes me think of something that I've been incorporating into my life more in the last few years is gardening, which for most of my life is not something I did at all, but I've been doing it more over time, which is actually something that my husband got me started doing. And that's a great example of something that is, it feels like a much more constructive and restorative and it does allow you to sort of do what you're saying about is a different kind of zoning out that feels much more.
It's mindful.
Exactly.
So which isn't really, right?
Right. It's like allowing it, like it gives your mind space from things that are otherwise crowding it.
Creating white space.
Yeah, exactly.
And you still, like you're saying, you still have the tactile.
Exactly.
It's the dirt and the rocks, maybe the occasional worm.
Yeah.
But the smells of the earth, at least out by us when it's this spring, you can smell the wet.
I love that.
I know. It's kind of pungent, is that the right word?
Yeah.
Like kind of like really wakes up your senses.
Yeah.
So I see that as, I guess, kind of similar, really, with the aromatherapy and the tactile.
Yeah, right. This way that our senses can keep us anchored in the present moment.
Yeah.
And, there's just not really a place for anxiety if you can be fully immersed in those sensory physical experiences.
So true. I mean, oh my God, it's so true. Because, and the key, right, is being 100% in the moment. If it's like 98, it's got to be like you are in the garden, you're in the hot bath, you're in the cooking, you're in the skiing, you're in the whatever you're doing.
Yep.
There is no room for anything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anxiety, depression, any of it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love this.